Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dorenforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists, and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Welcome back. Howdy. I'll explain why I'm using an Americanism in a moment's time, because we have got a really interesting, terrific thought leader of a guest today on Curtin's Cast, episode 9. I'm starting to lose track, Cos. Welcome, Cos Samaras, co-host of Curtin's Cast, the JCRC's podcast of political ideas, culture, and we have an international, got a globally themed episode today. We are absolutely delighted and humbled to have Drew Westen with us, US political guru. Drew Westen is a professor in the departments of psychology and psychiatry at Emory University and formerly taught at Michigan Uni and Harvard Medical School. He is the founder of Westen Strategies. What a great name. A strategic messaging consulting firm that serves nonprofits and political organizations. Drew is the author of 3 books and countless scholarly articles. His most well-known book is The Political Brain. I've got the prop here right in the studio, well-thumbed edition of the book, which I'm lending to Cos Samaras after the show. It's called The Political Brain, The Role of Emotion in Deciding the Fate of the Nation. This book has been widely used by political candidates and leaders around the world and is credited as having influenced campaign strategies in many races, beginning with the US 2008 presidential campaign. Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, described it as one of the most significant books in politics he had read. Drew has advised a range of organizations from presidential and prime ministerial campaigns across the world and the Democrats in the House and the Senate. Drew Westen, welcome to Curtin's Cast.
Thank you very much.
G'day. Howdy.
Howdy there.
Howdy, partner. Hug Samak. I know you have been, like me, celebrating Pesach, the Jewish Passover. I hope you ate less than me, because I don't think I'm going to need to eat for a good fortnight. But it's wonderful to have you on Curtin's Cast. Drew, I want to talk to you about how you got into this field. We've got a really interesting backstory. I was struck by an anecdote that you tell. You were sitting in a cafe in Atlanta when Bill Clinton, you'd never met Bill Clinton before, and he called you to tell you what a great book The Political Brain was, and you thought it was a hoax. Is that right?
That's right. I was at Starbucks in sweats. I get this call and someone says, will you hold for President Clinton? And I was about to say, yeah, and I'll hold for Mahatma Gandhi too, you know. But then this familiar voice comes on.
The Arkansas drawer. Yeah.
Yeah. And we after that, we met several times after that. We had actually met in a different context when I was a psychologist and not in politics, about 15 years earlier, when I did stand up and directed an hour of improvised comedy with him and First Lady Hillary Clinton sitting in the front row. It was until he laughed, it was the most terrifying thing in the world, because we began with a skit that was about this was pre-Lewinsky, one of these pseudo scandals we have in the United States about something really dumb about they were using the White House phones for campaign calls, and it began with I was playing Gore and this other guy was playing Clinton, and I began by saying, "Well, Mr. President, what do you think? Should we use AT&T or Verizon?" And those are phone companies here. I don't know if you've got those there, but And he busted up laughing. At which point it was like, all right, he can take one here. He was great.
You're a stand-up comedian.
I used to do some stand up, yeah, I did, and some comedy music. Actually, you would appreciate. I don't know if
Another
all your
Jewish
listeners.
comedian. I've never heard of them.
Well, I was gonna say I had a song on the radio in the U.S. for about 10 years at holiday time called "Oi to be a Goy on Christmas." Uh, and for your listeners who don't know what Goy is, it's a
Non-Jew.
slightly derogatory Yiddish term for a non-Jew, but it was expressing the feeling of many non-Jews around the world of if I could just have a Christmas tree, and if I could just have a blonde to kiss under the mistletoe.
So, all right. Well, you're a stand-up comedian. That's great part of your backstory. But you're a clinical psychologist by training. So,
Yes.
how did you get into the political game, and how did you come to write The Political Brain and receive the plaudits that you did? It's a bit of a Bible for me, that having written The Political Brain and influencing people like Bill Clinton and the Democrats and others.
Well, it actually began with Bill Clinton in a funny sort of way in the middle of the hearings on his impeachment, where Americans were arguing over whether can I use foul terms on your show or no?
Go for it. If they're too foul, we can edit it out. That's fine. This is the joys. This is not live television. This is the joys of podcasting.
Well, I guess this was on CNN at the time. Getting a blowjob in the White House. Is that an impeachable offense? And
We've heard far worse.
I was fascinated. What I was fascinated by was how people were coming up with these rationalizations for what was clearly an emotionally driven response. And so I actually did a study then on what were the predictors of people's attitudes towards when the Lewinsky story broke, and then a year later when the actual impeachment happened, the impeachment vote happened, and I was able to follow up the same people over time. They were just survey people we approached in various parking lots and grocery stores and stuff. And what was fascinating to see was we looked at how much they knew about the what he had done and what happened, the scandal, how much they knew about what constitutes an impeachable offense, and then we wanted to know what they felt about Democrats, the Republicans, Bill Clinton, and feminism. When we entered them all into an equation, it turned out that what they knew about the scandal predicted zero. What they knew about the Constitution and predicted zero. What determined primarily their attitudes towards whether or not what he did was an impeachable offense under the Constitution, when they were given the definition of an impeachable offense, was their feelings towards the Democrats and the Republicans, their feelings towards Clinton, and secondarily their feelings towards feminism. And it was all feeling all the time, which led me then to do a neuroimaging study a number of years later. I had been a commentator actually on. I don't think I've ever told the show on a podcast or on radio.
Great,
before.
we've got an exclusive.
I was a commentator for about 10 years on the flagship show of National Public Radio in America, All Things Considered, and I got fired that year because the year that we did the study and that launched and ended up launching my political career, which was 2004. John Kerry was beating George Bush in the polls by 18 points, and I at that time we had to use the phone. I called my editor and left her at that time were these things called voicemails. I left her voicemail and said I wanted to do a piece on why Kerry was going to lose, and I said he's running the most emotionally unintelligent campaign I've seen since the last Democrat before Bill Clinton and the one before him and the one before him. She entertained the thought, and then I kept coming back every month with another example of ways that he was doing really emotionally stupid things. And then finally, it got to the worst of them, and they just about published it. They had me record it, and then their political people said, that's stupid. And then he dropped 18 points in the polls and lost, and they fired me. For sometimes telling the truth is not the greatest idea, but it led me to do a neuroimaging study on how do partisans reason, and do partisans reason?
You're literally you're looking at people's brains, yeah.
Yes. So we are looking at people's brains as they are hearing and reading a reasoning task. It's a simple reasoning task. We gave them several in a row, but they're reasoning about their candidate or about the other candidate, and we use Tom Hanks as the control. They're reasoning about Tom Hanks. Who doesn't like Tom Hanks? But anyway, what they're presented with is something like, for Kerry, presented with a clip that says, or a statement that says, in 1996, John Kerry said about Social Security, which is our program for taking care of older people. Said about Social Security, we have to make the Social Security system solvent. Everything has to be on the table. We have a generational responsibility to solve the problem. All right. Then the next slide comes up, and they hear and see. This year, in 2004, John Kerry said about, on the same show, Meet the Press, said about Social Security, I would never touch Social Security. We have a generational responsibility to protect Social Security. The next slide comes up and says, consider Mr. Kerry's words or actions are inconsistent. Well, obviously they are, right? We played with we had Bush supporters who we did that to, and then we had Kerry supporters who we did that to. They were actually really strong partisans. We got a couple of officials of the Democratic and Republican parties of Georgia at that time. Yeah. So they were strong partisans, like virtually everyone today now. But what we hypothesized was that when they were reasoning about their own candidate and they would have to come to a conclusion that they didn't want to come to, we predicted that reasoning circuits would never turn on. And there were 1,000 studies by that point of what the reasoning circuits in the brain look like. It was a really brash hypothesis. And then we predicted that emotion circuits and emotion regulation circuits would turn on. And that a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate, which deals with, right up in the front of the brain, deals with conflict. Like, what do you do when you're in conflict, or you've got conflicting things, you've got to deal with them. It turned out we were right about all those things, but we missed one hypothesis that was mind-blowing, and that was, in fact, partisans on both sides reason to false conclusions every time. So we gave them each like 6 scenarios, about their candidate, and 6 scenarios about the other. Oh, they had no trouble reasoning correctly about the other candidate, but about theirs, they always reasoned incorrectly. And the striking thing was and we saw no signs of life in the reasoning circuits, nothing, until about 20 seconds later, when they had rationalized some decision. We started to see little bits of activation in what was probably rationalization, but they got a hit of dopamine in reward circuits in the brain for lying to themselves.
I can see brain activity going off in Cosmos Samaras' head. Right. So Cos has run campaigns for the centre-left party in Australia, the Australian Labor Party, for decades, and I can see neural activity going off in Cos's head, and I know he wants to.
It's exactly. I mean, what you, Drew, what you're talking about there is exactly the sort of, I would say, research process that we undertake when trying to score a blow on an opponent. So I'll take you through just quickly through a journey where we had to work out a negative campaign that was going to help stabilize our base, whilst at the same time animate our opponent's base in a negative way. And we will recruit certain demographic cohorts into those groups. And your first group comes in and they're really partisan conservatives. No matter what you threw at them, forget it. Wouldn't work, right? Even if they had the absolute downs on their side of politics. Then you kept bringing in more and more, and you worked your way down until you hit your side. And that's when they started biting into the negative. So you worked out, oh, right, okay, so our negative campaigns on your opponent work to lock in your base. It doesn't do anything with regards to their base. You're not going to grab votes, via this approach, by running a negative in our case, it's the Liberal Party here in Australia, a negative in the Liberal Party's base. You're not going to grab votes over to the Labor Party doing that process. So we worked that pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's playing out right now in the federal election.
That's right, correct.
The interesting thing here is that we find that negative campaigns, you can't run only a positive campaign.
That's right.
Because positive and negative emotions, we think of them as opposites of each other, but they're actually not. You think
yin and yang.
you're happy,
Yin and yang.
you're sad. But if you're for anyone who is married or has been with someone for a long time, if I asked you, who in the last 6 weeks has made you the happiest? They probably say, my lover, my whatever, my spouse. If you say, and who has pissed you off more than anybody else, it's the same person. We have conflicting. Anyone who matters to us, or any cause that matters to us, we have conflicting feelings about. And if you get it, if you only speak to people's positive emotions, you actually miss. You're not going to touch the other side with negative. With the 25% who are just diehards, or 30% who are diehards on the other side, you're not going to touch them no matter with anything. The people you can reach is you can reach some people in the center with negative ads, if you run them enough and if they're effective enough. But you can't give them a steady diet of negative ads, as you're saying. You've got to excite them. I mean, there are 4 emotions in politics that matter empirically: hope, enthusiasm, anxiety, or fear, and anger. And conservatives tend to add disgust and contempt, which progressives never add. But those are the things that you need to activate, and if you leave some of them out, you're trying to win a campaign with half a brain.
Yeah, and your big shtick is it's emotion and the brain, and like too often campaigners and politicos on the left we're running up against hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. And I really love
good example.
One of your quotes from the book, and this has been something which has been happening over the last couple of decades in the academy. It's this understanding that people aren't rational creatures. So this idea that we're all rational creatures, all creatures of the Enlightenment. Philosophers, cognitive scientists, economists, political scientists have said this since the 18th century, that the dispassionate mind makes decisions by weighing up evidence and reasoning to the most valid conclusions. And you say it actually bears no relation to how the mind and the brain actually work. And when campaign strategists start from this vision of the rational mind, their candidates typically lose. And one of the big paradoxes you draw out is the paradox of American politics, and I think it applies. I think because you'd agree with this.
Applies here.
The paradox of American Australian politics is that when it comes to winning hearts and minds, the party that views itself as the one with the heart,
yes,
you say for the middle class. That's a very American thing. We would say the working class,
yeah.
working class, the poor, and the disenfranchised, continues to appeal exclusively to the mind, whereas the right, and there is. You got a lovely phrase here talking about the centre left, the left, that we have an irrational, emotional commitment to rationality.
Well, right now in this country, we've got a federal election campaign underway, Drew, and both major parties are running a rational campaign. And what's happening? They're on the Labor side, their base is completely locked in. The primary vote has not moved for the last 8 weeks. On the right side, the only thing that's happening is the Conservatives are losing votes to their right-wing minor parties, right? But nothing's going on in between the two of them because basically, they're basically trading in the same set of tools and not cannibalizing each other's votes.
It's interesting. I flipped on a couple of just briefly videos of Albanese. Albanese, is that how it's pronounced? Or
Albanese, yeah.
Albanese.
Albanese?
Albanese.
Okay.
Everyone says Albanese. There are different interpretations.
Yes.
You can call him elbow. In Australia, we
Elbow.
had O, or
That's right.
everyone gets a nickname. The Prime Minister is known as Elbow. You can call him Elbow, Drew.
Okay, elbow. So I watched him, and I watched what, Dutton on the other side. Is it Dutton?
Yes.
Yeah, Peter Dutton.
Yeah, and I mean, Dutton was the duller of the two in at least what I saw, but they were both. Neither one of them started out by telling any kind of story.
100%.
I mean, humans have been around for somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years. And we've only had literacy for 5,000. So there had to be some way we passed along knowledge and values across generations, and we convinced each other over all that time, over 200,000 or 300,000 years. And there's a reason why all the holy books, the great monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they're all written in parables. And it's because stories capture our minds. And it turns out, I only told you a piece of how I got into politics. What really got into it's funny, given that my emphasis on emotion was emotion. It was I watched Kerry run another one of these typical Democratic and social democratic type campaigns. I've since learned from consulting, they're all over the world, that when you're looking at the parties, I'm not talking about the wild parties on the right and the left. We're talking about the parties that are fairly reasonable. That the left always focuses on issues and bores the crap out of voters, and the right always focuses on emotion and tries to scare voters. What got me into politics, into writing the book, The Political Brain, was watching Kerry lose after having watched Gore lose, and realizing that when I counted back in the 70 years from that was 2004, in the 70 years between Franklin Roosevelt, who first won in 1932, and 2004, only one Democrat had been elected and reelected to the presidency, Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
We had a couple of one-term presidents, and we just had another one. But that raised the question of, given that the Democrats had held the Congress for 50 years after FDR, what were they doing wrong? And it's this. If you don't tell a story to people, if you don't, everyone wondered why Biden was losing, even before people worried about his
Cognitive decline.
His cognitive functioning, and that debate that was seen around the world, I'm sure, where he froze up, which is, there's also an interesting story behind that. But anyway, long before that, he had engineered the best economy in the world, and the most extraordinary economic recovery from what should have been a lingering recession, like we had in 2008, that went on in the U.S. till 2016. I was doing focus groups with voters and measuring, doing large scale messaging research. I was hearing from voters in 2014, 15, were still furious that no bankers got locked up.
Yeah,
that's right.
For taking their homes, and for really good reason. So after watching Kerry lose another winnable election, I said, "Damn it, I'm going to write a book on how would you talk to voters if you started with an accurate understanding of how the mind and brain actually work and evolved." And then I started testing messages with now over 100,000 voters and about a million messages. And it turns out there is a story structure that every effective message I've ever tested has had, that's derivative of that once upon a time kind of story that we all know. With you set up an initial condition with protagonists and antagonists, and then there's a fight of some sort, or or some natural disaster you've got to deal with, and then you get over that hump, and then you face another little skirmish, and
The
then
master storyteller, as you recount at depth, and I would highly recommend people get a copy of The Political Brain. You can get a copy online. I don't think there's an Audible copy. Bill Clinton, he is the master storyteller, and you go through this, and there's a wonderful, you sort of analyze one of his sort of campaign videos, and I think he comes from the town of Hope. Is that right?
yes,
He's just absolute master.
one of the two best in American history, two best ads in American political history, and since 1952 when Eisenhower ran the first political ad.
Reagan's what was that ad?
Morning in America.
Morning in America.
That
was
was
a
in
big
America.
story.
That
right?
was the other one.
Yeah, that's right.
If you ask me what are the two
Yeah.
greatest ads, it was from two people from very opposite
That's
sides.
right.
I didn't like Ronald Reagan, but the ad, the second I saw it, there was another ad this year in the U.S. election, this last year, that was the second I saw it, I knew it was going to be devastating because the Democrats would not know how to answer it. And it was an ad that began with it ran on every National Football League, our football, American football, every National Football League game, every single one of them, the Baseball World Series, every one of the games. And there's an ad that began with, it was about trans people. There's an ad that began with Kamala Harris making a pretty dumb comment about she's elected. This had been from years earlier when she was trying to win over the left, saying that any trans person in prison who or anyone in prison who wanted to transition, that we should pay for it, that it's human right. And it ended with this tagline that was a killer, and it was
Yes.
she's for they them,
Yep.
he's
Yeah.
for us.
Yep, that's right.
And the thing that killed me about it was, whoever defines us and whoever controls the narrative about who us and them is,
Yeah.
wins the election.
In our tribes.
You're the same thing.
Yep, same thing. So it's all about, if you run a successful campaign, even in this country, you've successfully brought enough of the voters to consider you as part of their tribe.
That's right.
Now, that's becoming increasingly much more difficult for politicians, but really successful candidates here in this country. So we call them the Teal Independents here in Australia. What they really did in 2022 was they basically said, you're rejecting the orthodoxy, which is the political system that you clearly do not like. I'm one of you, and I'm standing because I'm coming from you. So the campaign they ran was no billboards, no big corporate, spending. It was all in people's gardens, in their community. It was basically excreting that narrative that I'm part of your tribe. Yeah, works like a gym.
Just said before, it reminded me of one of the great themes of your book is, again, lessons for the centre left, the left of politics. We avoid contentious political issues, but here in Australia, the Liberals or the Nationals, which are they're the rural party. We call them socialist, agrarian socialists, 'cause that's what they are. Or the Republicans will own the space, and our silence means that their framing prevails. And when you raise the trans issue and us, them, they, them, us, it's sending off alarm bells in my own brain. And one of the points you make is we shouldn't avoid talking about contentious issues, but we've got to be creative. We've got to think on our feet.
Right, that's right. And what people who are on the progressive or social democratic side of issues tend to think is that what people need is more nuance in our policies. Let me tell you my 10-point plan. Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I only made it up to 0.7. Let me tell you the other three, and you'll really be convinced. And it doesn't work like that. If I had
Human
been
beings are not
advised,
calculators. We're not calculators. It's
absolutely not.
It's shocking newsflash. We're not calculators. We're not rational beings. Which doesn't mean, importantly, that we shouldn't. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be committed to rational public policy making, but it doesn't win elections.
So when campaigning and relying on numbers, the trick we used to do which would be let's say a project was costing $1 billion. Okay, no, don't do 1 billion, do 1.123 billion. Right? So it actually has it triggers something else, obviously, in the voter's mind that makes it believable.
It is true. It also speaks to the way you describe an issue makes all the difference in the world. Like when Biden got into the White House, he wanted to. We hadn't had any upgrades in our infrastructure in the United States since 1955, when Eisenhower built the highways. Right? So we were way behind. High speed rails for us are at a snail's pace for people like you. So what he did was he proposed a $2.5 trillion bill. Well, he didn't call it that. I actually advised. I was I was leading the messaging, the message development and testing while that bill was getting put together, and I emphasized to the folks I was working with, you got to talk about jobs, because you're going to create 10 million jobs with this bill.
Yeah.
It's not just about brick and mortar, and these are going to be good paying union jobs, and you got to talk about that. So they actually did build that into the name of the act, but they never mentioned it. So what instead it got called was the $2.5 trillion spending package.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
first of all, you can't allow that to happen. But second, all right, if you're going to get called, if your bill is going to get called by the amount it costs, then here's the way you would do that. You'd say, yeah, my opponent keeps saying that, or the Republicans keep saying that we've got this unbelievable $2.5 trillion spending package. Well, you know what we're making? Actually, it's over 10 years. It's a $250 billion a year investment in America, which we haven't made in 75 years. And you want to know how much the Chinese put into their infrastructure? Get on one of their trains versus one of ours. So $250 billion for a year for 10 years as an investment, we couldn't make a better investment. If he had said that, it would have been a different story. But the other thing that I don't know if this is true of your left, but it tends to be true of ours, is the two biggest problems with how the left speaks, and especially in the U.S., it's especially men. The women have cojones the Democratic women, but the men don't. I actually think there's some ritual circumcision ceremony that when they get into Congress goes awry, and they accidentally take the whole thing. But what voters want to know is your heart in the right place? Do you understand and care about people like them, and do you share their values? And by the way, that's true of really educated voters. When I vote, those are actually the two questions I ask too.
Yeah, you hammer the point. Wealthy people, whether they vote left or right or centrist, they don't vote necessarily on self-interest. They vote with their values. They vote with their guts.
That's right. And they are able, because they're as wealthy as they are, to say, you know what, I'm going to subordinate my self-interest to my values, and my values tell me that no, I don't deserve this tax rate when my assistant's paying this tax rate. But the other problem that I've seen in progressives all around the world, social democrats around the world as well, is an inability to project strength.
Yeah.
We project warmth really well. We project empathy really well. People can feel that, Democratic presidents in the U.S. have been brilliant at delivering eulogies whenever they've had to. But, they've had to deliver a lot of eulogies because they were so frickin' weak that those eulogies were for dead kids from gun violence, from some shooter went into a school. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And Democrats just are incapable of pinning that on the other side and saying, we've had 1 million gun murders since Martin Luther King was killed in 1968. You know what? That's 1 million Republican gun murders, because They're the ones taking the money from the gun manufacturers, and that's why we've got dead school kids. And I don't want to hear these people talking about their family values. Your family values only last until your kid gets shot, and then you go, "Oh, I'm for common sense gun regulation." Well, you know what? Empathy starts home. But we progressives, we set the bar, and this is where there's some neuroscience work on this that I think may be relevant. Is that there's some research that suggests that conservatives have overactivity in an area, or a lot of activity in an area of the amygdala that's involved in fear response, and progressives or liberals have an overactivity or a lot of activity in an area, the anterior cingulate, which I was describing, which gets at dealing with conflicting facts and emotions, and how do I put these things all together? And it turns out that structurally in the brain, conservatives tend to have a larger mass of an amygdala, and progressives have a larger mass of the anterior cingulate. Now, what's chicken, what's egg? We don't know. Is it that if you're born with a bigger amygdala, you're more likely to be conservative? But what you can see, I think, around the world, and this is why I'm starting to believe that this is probably part of our DNA, is that progressives or social democrats or Democrats in the U.S. tend to set the threshold for danger way too high. And they will, like in the U.S., we had a coup attempt by a president, and we collected affidavits for 4 years. Like, you know what? The other side was stockpiling AR-15s, and we're collecting affidavits. Everyone in the world saw Donald Trump go in front of a mass of people and say, "We're going to take the Capitol to stop the steal." And then there was a riot and an attempt to overthrow the government, and no one other than someone on the left locked him up immediately and locked up the 147 members of Congress who, after the coup attempt, which they were hiding in closets when it was going on, and then they come out and they vote not to give the election to Biden when he won various states. Well, it's called sedition. It's called seditious conspiracy, and normally you hang people for treason or for treasonous activities. But you've got to send people a message that, no, we're not going to spend 4 years collecting affidavits. We saw what you did. We're going to have a jury trial within 3 months. We're going to put you away until then, and then afterwards you're going to lose that trial along with the 147 bunkmates you've got. And I hope you guys enjoy your evenings together for the next 20 years, because you're going to be in prison. That would have been the end of Trumpism in America. And instead, I blame it as much on the Democrats. Versus the thing I was just going to add is Republicans and conservatives tend to set their fear threshold too low, and I think that's part of why they otherize people so quickly. They see people as frightening because they're not just like them. And if they don't speak the same language, they're more scared by them.
Someone who did speak good language, someone who did, I think it was Clinton-esque, was Obama. And Cos and I have just, we have just put out, publicised a survey and some work that we've been doing, that my own work into political emotions and how that plays out and what the left can do better in Australia. And we surveyed young Australians aged 18 to 44, about attitudes, generally speaking about politics, particularly wanted to get into their brains about this sort of anti-establishment right-wing populism represented by Trump, obviously surging in Europe. And one of the really interesting things, we asked them whether they sort of trusted a whole range of figures, Australian political leaders, and they didn't trust a hell of a lot of people. Particularly Peter Dutton was really low on the trust rating. He had a worse rating than Joe Rogan. He was just above Donald Trump. But the two leaders that they actually had, only two leaders that had positive trust ratings from this cohort, were Obama and Jacinta Ardern.
Wow.
And Cos made a really interesting point about Obama being an outsider.
Yes, that's right. So he was considered as one of them because they're anti-establishment. They feel like they're not part of the political orthodoxy. They are attracted to outsiders. So those who speak their language.
So there is actually hope for the centre-left here as well, I should say. That I pulled out some hope.
And there's
from that-
gender
from that
divide here
finding.
too, by the
Yeah.
way. So
Hey, did you get some hope in your survey?
Well, in terms of them actually identifying, there's a lot, they're really grumpy with the establishment parties. They're really grumpy, the young people. They've copped a raw deal economically. They're shut out of the housing market. They can't buy a place, or they're renting on bad terms. But I grabbed a little bit of hope from the fact that the two most trusted political leaders, and they've got a whole lot of names, not just political leaders, but, Joe Rogan's and others, Jordan Peterson, they were a positive trust rating for only two leaders, and they're centre-left leaders, Obama and Jacinda Ardern.
Obama in particular was the last, I would say, person from the left, generally and globally, that did all that storytelling and pitched to people's emotions, but also was seen, as I touched on before, an outsider. But goes to your point, Drew, around spoke with emotion and pitched to voters' emotions when he was delivering his orations. Flip side, what's going on globally right now is we don't have anyone like him on the left side of politics in this space. And it's been completely populated by right-wing conservatives who, as you rightly point out, this approach is quite natural to them. So it's very appealing to a growing number of people, voters across the Western world who are anti-establishment and want to turf the entire system out the window.
I don't know how bad it is where you are, but I have to tell you, as an American and as someone who grew up in a country that has this now, as of next year, it'll be a 250-year experiment in democracy work, and most Americans could not imagine that there would ever be a day when we would have to question whether we would have a democracy. It speaks in part to just the right in the U.S. and the right in a lot of places right now is not committed to democracy.
It's not very it's not a conservative right.
No, and it's bizarre because you would think of a conservative in a democracy should be wanting to conserve democracy.
Correct.
But that's not how it is. And the fact that in the in the U.S. we're looking at a potential dictatorship by an orange reality TV host who's a diagnosable psychopath. I used to be in my psych professor days, I studied classification of psychiatric disorders. I wrote a piece called "All the President's Mental Disorders."
Is it a book?
I'm actually thinking now of turning it into a book.
Turn it a book.
Sounds like great material, Drew Westen. We have run out of time. It's been amazing talking to you, and I would love to have you back on because I believe you have a new book. I
have one in my head. I'm working.
You got one in your head. Well, when you get that out of your head and onto the screen, I would love to talk to you about that, and I'd love to talk to you about the work of the John Curtin Research Centre, work that I'm doing here together with Costa Samaras, because I think it's definitely in your wheelhouse. It's been fantastic to talk to you. I'm searching for an Americanism as a way of sending us out, but I don't have anything particularly creative. So thank you to listeners. Take care. See you later. Actually, God bless. God bless.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Curtin Cast listeners. And we will see you next week when we are just a fortnight out from ballot day on the 3rd of May. Ciao.